what would you recommend to a VP of marketing or a CMO? What do companies need to do today in order to be successful?
So I think that, certainly in the last, I would say 6 to 9 months, the market's changed a lot. SaaS companies in particular were at a point where growth at any cost was in fashion, so to speak. And that's no longer the case. Everyone's looking now at efficient growth. Most marketing orgs and CMOs have had to revise their budgets. Like I said, there's so much more emphasis and focus on efficient growth. And so everyone's looking more closely at marketing ROI. That's not any surprise. That should be business as usual. You should always be focused on marketing ROI. The only thing I'd say is that it sometimes also leads to an overemphasis on short-term tactics just to generate leads or to generate pipeline. I think you just want to be wary of not over skewing towards that, to that short-term tech mentality, because you still need to, invest in creating awareness, building your brand, getting to, like they say, don't focus just on demand capture, focus also on demand creation, demand generation. And that requires a little bit of a longer term view. Second, I'd say to do this right, it's really, really important to get aligned. And I know everybody thinks they're aligned, but these are the kind of times when priorities change, the stakeholders, everybody else in the company, their sense of what's a priority changes. And so get aligned, I'd say again, with the sales leadership and the CEO on what are the most important priorities. I'd say those are the things that are really important. And then beyond that, I think, again, these days, and it's been true for many years now, but it becomes even more important in times like this, that you have to be really data-driven. Marketing has become, even on things like brand or communications, has become very analytics and data-driven. But I'd say I do that.
Hey, Sanjay, it is good to see you and welcome in.
Great to see you, Paul. Excited to be on this podcast.
It's great to get to time with you and get to sit down. We actually, have crossed paths in a couple different roles, so it's going to be fun to kind of show everyone, your track. And it's not every day on the show that we get, the CMO and the marketing perspective. So I think that's what's going to stand out. Is it all right? I'm going to share my screen just for a minute and let folks kind of take a quick look at your early school days and then kind of hit a couple of the roles that you've taken on, because I think it's going to kind of frame the conversation. And then, so Bangalore, that's home. And then Tulane University in New Orleans, that's your schooling days, right?
That's absolutely right. Yep, I grew up in Bangalore, India, which, as many people know, subsequently became the first tech hub in the country, and I think many people still refer to it as the Silicon Valley of India. That's also where I did all of my schooling, like you said, and did my undergrad in engineering at the Bangalore University at a college called RE College of Engineering. Tulane, that was a little bit of a serendipity, I'd say. It was the pre-internet days, and you didn't really have easy access to information about a lot of universities. So you had to first write to a school, literally a letter to a school. So they send you an application form. No one in my immediate circle at the time had heard about Tulane, so I would have never thought about applying to it. But someone happened to be visiting, actually a business associate of my father's, and he had studied at Tulane, offered to send me an application, and then I was lucky enough to get accepted into the master's program along with a teaching assistantship, and ended up in New Orleans. Had no idea what an influence that city would have on me.
What a great story. Have you been back to New Orleans, or have you visited, in the past few years, or it's been a while?
Oh yeah. No, I go there frequently. It's become a little bit of an annual pilgrimage. I go to the Jazz Fest every year. That's at the end of April and the early part of May. So that's been a standing, if I'm not otherwise committed, I end up making that trip. And then I've also gone back on a couple of occasions about an accelerator that's now based out of New Orleans called Idea Village that's doing really well and doing some great work in promoting and helping supporting tech companies in the area.
And I've always wanted to go to the Jazz Festival. I've heard of that. And what type of tech companies, what type of sector, what stage company do they start to incubate or help?
Yeah, the Accelerator Idea Village focuses actually has a pretty broad range of companies. They can be B2C, a mix of B2C and B2B companies. Many of them pre-seed. Some of them may have revenue, but often are pre-revenue, just a founder or a couple of founders with an idea and are just in the process of building a prototype and putting together a business plan.
So I'm going to just quickly scan up here and show everyone that you had an incredible run at Microsoft. It looks like well over a decade, 12 years plus. And then I'm going to keep scrolling up. We're going to want to talk about the different roles you took on. And then obviously I knew that you had joined Box and we crossed paths there. And now today, obviously at Chargebee, leading up brand marketing as CMO. So it's a great track record, and there's a couple of steps there. Maybe just let me ask you, your first role at Microsoft, do you remember what it was that helped you or drew you to it?
Yeah, no, interesting that you ask. I actually was coming off of having just done a startup that was eventually we sold it or acquired by a company on the East Coast. When I joined Microsoft at the time, I'd never worked for a large company. And so I thought I'd last there 2 years or less, either the system would quote unquote reject me or I'd reject the system. But I started out in a business unit that was relatively new. And it was like being in a startup, but with the benefit of having a big, mature, experienced safety net and a support system. So it actually turned out to be a fantastic experience. Then I got a bunch of different experiences in different roles across, BizTalk, then SharePoint. I even did a stint internationally leading part of the business overseas in the India region. And then came back, as you can see, to be part of the Office 365 team in the early days when Microsoft was going through the transition from being a great company selling licensed software, on-prem software, to being a SaaS company. So,
wow,
it was kind of amazing to see the scale at which the company operated. It was just the long-term thinking, just the dogged determination to succeed. And I think that was kind of the thing that struck me when I joined initially.
What part of marketing did you start in?
Yeah, most of my roles in the early days were actually the few years were primarily in product marketing and go-to-market. And then subsequently I got a role that was a more broad-based marketing, including a focus on advertising and building an audience marketing strategy. So a few different roles there.
So if we're going to talk about Microsoft and Box, I bet there's parts of it that maybe apply now today with product-led growth. So let me just give you the first one, which is, I ask everyone the same question. What's your definition of product-led growth?
So there's, of course, the classical definition, and I'll come back to it. But to me, I think PLG, first of all, it tends to be an overloaded term, I think, these days when I hear it from different people. But it basically means making something that people will want to use and buy. It's based on the idea that users want to self-educate. They want to self-serve. They don't necessarily want to first start by talking to a salesperson. And so you basically let people try your product either for free or for very little, for a low price. And then they like it so much that they want to use more of it. And then eventually they'll tell others about the product internally within their company if it's a commercial setting, or if you're selling to a consumer, then to their friends, their peers, and people like that. The more classical definition is that it's a growth strategy where the product itself acts as the main driver of acquiring a customer, retaining that customer, and even driving more what people call expansion, more use of the product within that customer.
I like the way you framed it. I like you started with what is in the mind of the buyer, or there's been a shift or a change that you touched on. So I really like that definition. Let me just ask you about a little bit of the perspective that you were thinking about the fad, or it's been over presented or over prescribed, or I guess what's your take on PLG? Like, is it starting to be pushed a little too much, or what's causing some of the kind of the confusion?
Yeah, so I'd say that, one, I think there are some, they oversimplify. People tend to simplify PLG, and there's some misconceptions. For example, everything, a lot of people, when they first think about product-led growth, they think about it being, you have a free product, it's easy to sign up, and that's enough. That's what PLG is all about. Just, giving something free and having an easy sign-up form. But that's really not the end of it. It's really, really important, I've learned, to have a customer experience, have a situation where the user or the customer experiences value in using the product in a very short amount of time after signing up. Otherwise, you just end up with a whole bunch of free signups that remain dormant because someone signs up, they find it daunting to use, they never actually start using the product enough to get value, let alone stay with the product long enough that they want to use more features. And so you end up with either someone using the product in a very basic way or not enough, and hence, they let it lie. They don't, you have them signed up as a user, but they're not getting any value from you. You're not getting anything back from them. That's the one thing. The second thing is I've learned it's not just a product thing. While the name says product-led growth, it's not just a product thing. It's not just a marketing thing. The companies that have done it best have typically had a strong cross-functional team that's laser focused on ensuring that the right experience, all the way from the product experience to educating and guiding the user, to collecting and analyzing usage data. That's a critical part because that data helps you constantly improve the user experience, and knowing when to intervene, provide support or education because they've got stuck somewhere. And that can serve as an adoption blocker, and the user will stop using it more. That's the second thing. And then the last thing I'd say is that, it has, like you said, people have tended to kind of jump on it, but it's really not for every product. For example, it's not the appropriate strategy for, any product, even a SaaS product. If the product is too complex to set up, or it's not something that an end user can directly sign up and use, because it requires a significant amount of business process change, or required a bunch of other people within the company to be involved in addition to the person who's signing up. That makes it more difficult to really fly as a product-led growth experience, and may not be the best suited to it.
That's a good call out that you should look at. Is it the end user who can actually install and receive the value quickly, or the business process change is a really good point. So you gave us a couple different points to anchor in and focus on, and you said, time to value, and you talked about usage data. Is there a couple of metrics that you've always looked at, or I'm curious when you've seen it work, what does good look like? What's a metric to be observing?
Yeah, so I think The specific KPIs and metrics probably vary by the product and where you're going to deliver and how you're delivering value. But some of the things that you definitely look at are very early on in the process itself is how quickly is, first of all, you have to define what is that first moment of value. And you're in the best position to define that because you've developed the value proposition for the user. And so the thing you want to look at are things like, one, how quickly are people able to sign up? Once they sign up, what's the time it takes them to get from sign up to activation? And activation can mean anything from, let's say in the case like it was at the box, you're uploading your first file that you want to share with someone, or the first piece of content that you want to create in Box that you then want to subsequently share with somebody else. So that's that first level of activation, if you will, the first activation. And then the last point, the next stage then becomes, what is this time to value for some additional features that you've designed for this user, so they actually start using the product frequently? Because that's the other thing about product-led growth. If it's something that you're not creating a situation or a scenario where the user feels like they need to come back to it, ideally daily, but at least weekly.
What would you recommend to a VP of marketing or a CMO? What do companies need to do today in order to be successful?
So I think that, certainly in the last, I would say 6 to 9 months, the market's changed a lot. SaaS companies in particular were at a point where growth at any cost was in fashion, so to speak. And that's no longer the case. Everyone's looking now at efficient growth. Most marketing orgs and CMOs have had to revise their budgets. Like I said, there's so much more emphasis and focus on efficient growth. And so everyone's looking more closely at marketing ROI. That's not any surprise. That should be business as usual. You should always be focused on marketing ROI. The only thing I'd say is that it sometimes also leads to an overemphasis on short-term tactics just to generate leads or to generate pipeline. I think you just want to be wary of not over skewing towards that, into that short-term tech mentality, because you still need to, invest in creating awareness, building your brand, getting to, like they say, don't focus just on demand capture, focus also on demand creation, demand generation. And that requires a little bit of a longer-term view. Second, I'd say to do this right, it's really, really important to get aligned. And I know everybody thinks they're aligned, but these are the kind of times when priorities change. The stakeholders, everybody else in the company, their sense of what's a priority changes. And so get aligned, I'd say, again, with the sales leadership and the CEO on what are the most important priorities. I'd say those are the things that are really important. And then beyond that, I think, again, these days, and it's been true for many years now, but it becomes even more important times like this, that you have to be really data-driven. Marketing has become, even on things like brand or communications, has become very analytics and data-driven. But I'd say I do that.
Was so intrigued by, you just said data, and I was about to ask you another follow-on, which is, if it's PLG specific, if we're talking product-led growth, if you could only pick 3 roles, what are your 3 hires, or who are your 3 marketing players?
I'd say 3 roles are probably the most critical. Obviously, someone on the product team that's focused on the product experience and UX. 2, a growth-focused or growth-minded product marketer. And this is someone who, cares about understanding the user deeply. understanding use cases deeply, can then translate that into compelling messaging. So that's the second role. And the third role, which I think people underestimate, is a data person. Call them a data scientist, a data analyst, who can really work closely. These three folks have to work really closely and iterate constantly and frequently based on what they're learning, especially in the early days of rolling out a new product.
So helpful, because I think if people are listening, I'll point them to your comment that you need to decide, is this the right approach for your product and for your buyer? But if they go forward and if they select product-led growth, and if they choose wisely and it is the right path, it's ideal for their platform. I think what you just shared is super helpful for a founder or an early team. Take us to the very end in the final segment. Been playing with, or is there some tool that's been top of mind for you?
I guess should be no surprise. I think, generative AI has just taken the world by storm. And so I've been spending time understanding how ChatGPT can be used, particularly in marketing. There's a bunch of tools, not just ChatGPT, there's a bunch of other tools on the audio, video, and content side in general that have come to the fore. So I've been experimenting with that. My first set of experiments, if you will, was just to learn how to write good prompts. I've been just using ChatGPT and its variations to be able to do research, which I found really, really useful. Obviously, to either edit or refine content, things like that. And I found it to be a really, really powerful tool to do that.
So interesting. I'm sure everyone's been talking about it, and there's half of the audience probably maybe feels that it could be a lot of noise and it could be a false start, but then the other half be very curious and they've played with their own workflows, and so I'm still kind of on the fence. What did you do when you said you were doing prompting and learning? Was there a place you started, or how did you kind of get a construct of what is this like, or what do I need to know to have a base, kind of skill set?
Yeah, there's been a bunch of people in the industry on LinkedIn even that have been extremely generous with, sharing resources, their own experiments, things you will find fantastic resources on YouTube, great resources that, like I said, people publish on LinkedIn. And this is, these are not generic. These are typically use case based, and you can find them for people, I'm thinking of using now, looking at a few prompts that will help me, dissect and analyze some data that I have.
Do you find that the current interface with the GPT, where you're actually typing in those prompts, do you find that is that creating some context switching, or like you're going into that portal and you're doing the prompting? And do you feel that at some point it's going to change, or it's going to become more integrated in the workflow, or is this a new way of working that you maybe spend an hour doing the prompting and the schematics of how to kind of pull up data?
Yeah, so I'm sure that as a few tools have already done, Office 365 has incorporated things like ChatGPT in the form of Copilot. So those will get integrated more and more, so they become seamless. But I'd say it's not that disruptive. I mean, it's a fairly easy to use interface. It's chat based, natural language, and so I think the question much more is to learn the constructs and then keep refining. Number one. Second, a trick that a couple of people, that I learned from a couple of other folks who have been experimenting with ChatGPT for a while, has been when you create a prompt, rather than writing a second or a third prompt, you go back to the first prompt. That ChatGPT gives you the ability to edit the first prompt that you wrote, and then see how that changes the results. And that's a great learning tool for you to see how you can create more and more effective prompts, rather than having to, it's a much faster way to get to the best prompt that will give you the answer that you want.
That is, I know exactly what you mean, because I find that I'll go 5 or 6 steps and I'm not arguing with it, but I'm trying to steer it back to the angle or to what I was actually originally hoping for. But I've never tried actually just going to the original prompt and then just changing it and being more direct or giving more data or changing how I'm asking it to just, what about the output of what you're finding it creates for you? Is it typically giving you, a few columns or rows of data that then you copy and paste it into Excel? Or does it ever generate something else does
So
it
yeah,
generate actual code for
that's
you? Like when you're,
I have yeah. So I haven't yet used the code generator. I haven't used it to generate code yet. That's my next step. But of course, it a lot of even ChatGPT, the tool, not the one that's integrated into Excel, gives you the ability to ask it to format, the response that it's giving you, and especially if it's something that makes sense to present as a table in columns, like you said, it makes it very easy for you to do that. You just say it in natural language, and it presents it to you in that fashion. And then you're right, you can take that and cut and paste it or export it as a CSV file. You can create a CSV file or put it directly into something like Google Sheets or Excel.
sales side of things, I think we always, the first, few guests, we all went to outbound and we thought about formatting emails and then formatting like, buyer personas and then, with a pain gain lens. So like, what
Right.
are the 3 pains that a persona has? What are the 3 things that they will gain with enhanced workflow? But that typically comes out as a, column kind of spreadsheet. I'll be interested to see, when does it start creating more visuals, or when does it create actual slides or actual video, kind of take it to that output.
Well, there are some tools, not ChatGPT itself, but ones that use OpenAI, that the large language model that OpenAI has, and they do that. There's happy to follow up and send you a couple of tools that do exactly what you're talking about. Someone just posted recently something they use to create slides, like literally a presentation in PowerPoint. Based on some input that they gave it. Likewise, you can, and the one that's been cited pretty frequently is Midjourney.
Different markets, and you've seen, this current trend, and I agree with you that it's a positive that we're focused on ROI, and it's a positive we're focused on what are the best businesses and the most sound businesses. But for the marketers or for the salespeople out there, just a question would be, are there some founding principles, or is there a couple of tactics, like what tends to work well, or what messaging tends to resonate when we've got the headwinds, when it's tough out there?
Yeah, I'll give you the example of something that I've now seen work twice, and it's interesting. The last downturn, the 2008, 2009, when the financial crisis happened, the cloud was still new. And, the early messaging back then and I was at Microsoft, that we led with was this idea that you could be much more agile, you could grow faster. It was all about agility. And as soon as that 2008, 2009 downturn crisis hit, we realized that didn't resonate as much. And in fact, what was top of mind for everyone, for customers across the world really, was how do I manage costs? And so all of a sudden, focusing on the benefit that cloud provided in terms of lower capital investment or capital outlay, you didn't have to, you just bought as much as you needed rather than overbuying. That message really resonated. Likewise, I'd say this is a good time, and at Chargebee, we did this, where one of the benefits of Chargebee as a platform is that it really enables subscription or recurring revenue businesses to do a great job of sorting their hypergrowth, whether it's by expanding into new markets, supporting new payment gateways, allowing their customers to pay in different currencies and using different payment methods, or simply growing your product catalog because you're going to offer more more offerings to your customers. That actually isn't as much top of mind for people these days. And so we shifted gears and we started focusing on how it helps you drive efficient growth, and more importantly, in these times when it's typically a lot harder to acquire new customers, how Chargebee can help you retain customers, increase customer loyalty, prevent churn, prevent unintended churn. And so I'd say, as you look at, of course, this varies by the value proposition that you have and incredibly present, but reorient the value of or re-message, if you will, the value of the product that you offer in terms of how customers can address their more immediate needs of today, which tend to be around the areas I talked about. Saving money, doing better cost management, being able to do more with less, being more effective and efficient versus simply focusing on runaway top line growth.
Such great examples. I almost, as you were talking, was thinking of like a sliding scale, or being able to look at what's your message and is it resonating, and then you might have to change it. And you just gave some phenomenal real world examples that I think can be helpful. So thank you so much. Great to see you again.
Great chatting with you. Thanks.